I'm Lynn McDonald, and I would like to welcome you to this town hall on behalf of Canadian Electoral Alliance and Just Earth, the prime co-hosts. We have many terrific co-sponsors, and they will be introduced shortly, and I'll introduce the moderator shortly as well. But I was asked to say something about why we're having this town hall. And it is because we are concerned that there hasn't been action on climate change. We have had one town hall on this subject before, and we felt that there wasn't enough attention paid to climate change on it. And the major motivation for many of us to form the Canadian Electoral Alliance several years ago was inaction on climate change. And the idea being that we would have an alliance of parties that would be committed to going forward vigorously on climate change. Well, that's water under the bridge now. We don't have an electoral alliance formed, and we have people like Joyce Murray and Nathan Cohen who advocated an electoral alliance and advocated proportional representation, which we certainly advocate, and we have a fair vote candidate here as well, that we've got these ideas and they're not going far enough. And so we're trying to build a constituency of support for these ideas, even though we haven't got them on the ground yet, but we're trying to build for the next election. And we hope that we will keep people involved and keep people pressing on these issues to get coalition, cooperation, accords are not dirty words. We want people to think about these things, even if we don't have formal commitment across the parties. We'd like to think that party leaders, if there isn't a majority at the next election, that a couple of the party leaders might have each other's telephone numbers. And then they would start to talk very quickly about an alternative that would move forward on these absolutely crucial issues. So I'm going to turn it, we have a wonderful panel, but Reg Stackhouse, our moderator, I'll just introduce him, and he will be introducing the panel. Dr. Stackhouse is Principal Emeritus from Wycliffe College, Anglican Theology College at the University of Toronto, and he's worked on many human rights issues. He was commissioner with the Canadian Human Rights Commission and the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and he was a colleague of mine in the House of Commons back in the olden days, and I was very pleased to see your name. I checked it, Reg, on the list of 30 progressive conservative MPs who supported my Non-Smokers Health Act, which showed cooperation across party lines can work. Alas, climate change is a bigger issue than that one, and so we need more powerful cooperation across party lines now, and that's a subject for tonight. So, Dr. Stackhouse shares our concerns about ecology and human rights, and I'm very happy to turn the meeting over to Dr. Stackhouse.
Thank you very, very much. And so good to be associated with Lynn and with the members of this really impressive panel. I'm so glad to come here and see the hall filled. It's great to, and really encouraging to find there are citizens of Toronto who are interested in topics other than what's going on at City Hall today. Okay, some people consider it an advantage if they can't hear me, but thank you very, very much. And I appreciate being part of this program and being in the, mentioned in the publication that introduced the topic and the panelists. I make just one important, though small correction in its reference to me, where it says former Conservative MP. It's a mistake, real mistake. I am a former Progressive Conservative MP. That word, missing word, is more than an adjective. It's part of both a title and a history. And I'm privileged to have been a small part of that history. future holds. It challenges us, but also gives us an opportunity. And part of that opportunity is the subject for tonight. And what a panel our organizing committee has put together. Our first speaker will be Bruce Hyer, MP for Green Party, and MP for Thunder Bay, which is a riding with a especially distinguished history of outstanding members of Parliament. I'm thinking of C.D. Howe and Doug Fisher. And Bruce certainly shows he's on their level when you look at his record of achievement in bills, motions, resolutions, publications, causes of all kinds. So, Bruce, let me call on you. And you can speak from here. Good.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I assume you know the three questions for tonight, but I'll quickly read them. I was asked to come and comment on three questions. How good or bad is Canada's action on climate change? How could proportional representation make a difference, and how do we get there? So I'd like to start with a little bit of background. I was first elected in 2008 as Jack Layton, New Democrat, and in early 2009, Jack asked me to introduce a climate change bill, and that was C-311, a private member's bill called the Climate Change Accountability Act, and it set reasonable greenhouse gas standards to be achieved by certain dates, and it set forth a process for making sure that there was accountability and review on a regular basis. It was not prescriptive in any way. I think everybody in this room, or probably most of you anyway, if there are any climate change deniers here, would you please leave immediately? Or at least don't speak up. So you all know, I think, how badly we need to reduce emissions and what the consequences are if we don't do it. And so there's no need to preach to converts here tonight, and I won't. The science is very clear, and I don't even think the deniers in the Harper government can keep denying it anymore, at least not in public. So after a lot of hard work by myself and a lot of other people, C-311 actually passed in the House of Commons, a minority government at that time, with the cooperation, imagine, between the NDP Liberals and the Bloc. And then, one of the toughest days of my life, quite literally, it was killed in the Senate about 6 months later in an ambush, to put it bluntly, orchestrated by Mr. Harper. I have the dubious distinction and honor of having the only bill in the history of Canada passed in the House of Commons by the people who are elected and killed in the Senate with no debate, no committee work, no consideration of any time, just straight raw politics, and with no hearing of witnesses. But you know, the Prime Minister doesn't have to use the Senate as a veto, although he has it, and he'll probably have it for a very long time, even if he's defeated next time, the way things are headed. You may recall that this was the man that promised he would never elect a single senator to an unelected Senate. Anybody know the number in terms of how many senators he's appointed now? 59. 59. So there are many ways for the Prime Minister to act as a dictator here in Canada, this one or others. And the Prime Minister's office has way too much power. It's been growing since 1970, and I'll talk a little bit about that. One of those excessive powers is the ability to stack the Senate. Another is to whip MPs. And believe me, I've been there. I can show you the scars from whippings. And so he can now pretty much, with his false majority, not a real majority, and we'll talk about that, he can kill anything in the House that he wants, suppress anything he wants, and put anything forward that he wants. And this is despite the fact that, as you know, his party got less than 40% of the vote in the last election, but under our flawed electoral system, with 39% of the vote, you can get 60% of the seats and 100% of the power. And so as a result, 40% of Canadians are not voting now, and that's a real shame, and many of them feel their votes are not meaningful anymore. You know, if you, in your riding, if a certain party has won for the last 110 years, at some point many people unfortunately give up voting and saying, why, I hate this phrase, but why waste my vote if it doesn't even get $2 you know, for the party anymore. So, in very few countries in the world is that the case where 39% of the vote can get you 100% of the power. If you don't know these numbers, instead of 167 seats, which he has in this parliament, if we had proportional representation, Mr. Harper would have 122 seats, and he would not be running Canada unless he formed a coalition with another party or two, or at the very least could operate cooperatively in a minority government. And instead of 1 seat, the Greens, if it were proportional, should have 12, thank you, sir. And that's what Canadians voted for. So in the Western world, almost all of modern democracies have some kind of proportional government. Now, there are lots of different kinds, and we don't have time tonight to talk about all the various kinds. But my elevator speech about proportionality is if the Purple Party gets 20% of the national vote, through one of many possible mechanisms, they get 20% of the seats. And all the ones that have our first past the post antiquated system are all Brit colonies, former members of the British Empire. And they are Britain themselves, the United States, Canada, India, and that notable bastion of democracy, Zimbabwe. So 95% of all the democracies have some kind of proportionality. I want to now shift to the other huge and little-known obstacle to democracy in Parliament. And that is the tragic reason why most MPs today no longer work for their constituents, unless they have very, very large backbones. And even then, it's pretty hard. It's the fact that the national leaders hold a very sharp sword of Damocles over the head of every one of their MPs. Did you know that parties are not even mentioned in the Canadian Constitution? No mention whatsoever. It simply says there shall be members of Parliament who are nominated in their ridings and run and win, and they run on their name, no party name in the ballots for 103 years, and they're supposed to represent their constituents. The Constitution is very clear about that. But in 1970, there was a big change. So from 1867, time of John A. Macdonald, until 1970, 103 years, no party names on the ballots, and MPs did, for the most part, work for their constituents. And John A. Macdonald had a name for his MPs, and really he was more a creature of them than they were a creature of him. He worked for them. They selected him as their leader, as is the case in Britain now, and he called his own members loose fish. And he had trouble keeping those loose fish together. It was a big challenge. But in 1970, Pierre Trudeau changed the Elections Act. And what everybody noticed and debated, and was a 20-second soundbite on the evening news at that time, was adding the party names to the ballot. I think that was a mistake myself, but it was nothing compared to what was in the fine print. What was in the fine print was the requirement that candidates can only run for an official party if the national leader signs your nomination papers. And so the national leader then had a club to hold over their heads, whether it was the Prime Minister or one of the other parties, and that usually works. And believe me, I've been there. If you don't behave, they say, we may not sign your nomination papers. And so most MPs fall into line with that requirement. In one fell swoop, at that time, in 1970, MPs no longer worked for their constituents, they worked for their parties. And Pierre Trudeau called his own backbenchers only a few weeks or months after that 1970 election law. Anybody know the phrase? Come on, somebody.
Nobody.
Mere trained seals. Mere trained seals, yep. So, one of my fellow MPs, who's still a friend, although he meets me in dark corners in bars where it won't be seen, from my former party, told me sadly, after I did what I did, leaving the party and going independent for a year and a half, that he has now accepted, sadly, but accepted that he is, quote, I love this phrase and hated this phrase, a customer sales representative for his party in his riding. Is that sad or what? Our system should not be granting a narrow minority of special interests and parties control of everything. We've been paying the price for that huge flaw in our electoral system for a long time, and we're going to keep paying it until we change it somehow. A good first step would be to pass the Reform Act of 2014, and that's Michael Chong's bill. Michael Chong is a conservative, and he is, like this gentleman, a progressive conservative, really, which would end the signing of nomination papers by the party leaders and also restore the ability of MPs to work for their constituents again instead of the party leader. And it would also allow the caucus to turf the leader with a vote of 50% of the MPs plus one. So I urge you, please pay attention to Michael Chong's Reform Act and tell your MP, whoever it is, that you're going to be watching them very closely to see if they will dare to vote to free themselves from their servitude to the party. So today we have King Stephen. Sorry, if he were here, I'd say it too. He doesn't like me either. And tomorrow, though, after the next election, we may have some other king or queen with just as much power running Canada, unless we work together. A true majority would mean that MPs would represent over 50% of the national vote. It doesn't happen very often in other democracies. Other democracies actually learn how to operate in coalitions and minority governments that are relatively stable, and they actually learn to cooperate. I've traveled to Europe and other countries a lot, or I did, and they really are far more functional than we are. So research actually proves this, and there are other examples, but I'll give you one. There was a decades-long study carried out by Dr. Arend Liphart, Lijphart, but pronounced Liphart, at the University of California. He studied 39 Western democracies with different systems, and he published a book which I recommend, Patterns of Democracy. He found that false majoritarian systems, and he called it, like I call it, a false majority that we have here, like first past the post, had, his words, a toxic political atmosphere where one regional power base is pitted against another and issues are over-politicized, and I would add, issues like climate change. He also found that countries with such a winner-take-all system suffers from wild and expensive and disruptive policy swings as one government representing a minority enacts policies only to be reversed when the next government representing a different minority of voters, scraps them. For example, at first Canada was in the Kyoto Accord, remember? And then Harper ripped it up. The last government supported the science behind climate change, at least in theory, if not in results, and then Harper attacked it. Our international allies and our businesses don't know whether we are coming or going. Our reputation on the world stage is not high, despite what, politicians get elected by saying we're the greatest country in the world. Well, sorry, we're not. Liphart also found that consensus-style democracies, those with proportionality in the voting systems, perform at least as well on most parameters as winner-take-all democracies, but a whole lot better in a number of key areas. 2-minute warning. A better handle on inflation, better on crime in general, despite lower incarceration rates and costs, more foreign aid work and social supports, better care and outcomes for the environment, and lower gaps in income. The politics in those countries have a very functional and business-like way. Politics in most other countries in Europe is a lot more boring than ours. I'm kind of craving politics that's a little bit more boring. I know that Peter Mansbridge and others wouldn't agree, but the media would not agree. But boring is not always bad. Predictable, stable, sustainable. So I've been arguing for a very long time, for over a decade, that we need to fix our voting system. It's never been more important than it is now. And skipping ahead. So, to answer the question, how would proportional representation make a difference to climate policy? It would make all the difference in the world. It's that simple. It's the big one. The two big ones are, we need to get proportionality in our voting system, and we need to end the signing of nomination papers by our national leaders. So I'm glad that the opposition, all the opposition parties now seem to be at least thinking about ending that, and other people here will talk about that. I just want to underscore one thing. By the way, Justin Trudeau has been proposing preferential voting. Please don't be sucked into that trap. It is not proportional, not even a little bit, and it will favor the two larger parties and make it even more difficult for small parties than it is now. And the NDP had majority governments in BC, Manitoba, Ontario, and Nova Scotia, and they never chose to walk the proportional representation walk. So I'm counting on Joyce Murray, who's doing a great job. She deserves a lot of thanks and a lot of support for leading a charge for proportionality and electoral reform within the Liberals. And I'll bet you that Linda is going to fight, at least hope, but I bet she will, to keep proportional representation from falling off the back of the truck in the NDP. So, my last words of advice are, get active. Join a political party, any party, and push for proportional representation inside and out. Hold MPs' feet to the fire on proportional representation and other kinds of democratic reform, no matter what party they're in. Make sure they don't weasel out of this, no matter what they say. And you may recall, as I said, Harper promised, no, I didn't say this. Harper promised actually to create proportional representation when he was in opposition, and we know where that has gone. So I've done a lot of things in my life. I have a very long resume. I'm not young, and I've never seen any organization or process as dysfunctional as the Parliament of Canada. So I'm sad, but that's how I feel about it. So I urge you to get active, get involved, and don't let them continue to destroy our democracy. Let's restore it. Thank you very much.